Hey everyone, welcome to today's Hoboken Free Church Devotional. So happy Wednesday and thanks for joining us. I hope everyone's doing well as we're moving midway through November and just about to be close to Thanksgiving time. So today I'm going to be reading from James's letter to the church, specifically chapter 5, verses 7 through 12, where he's talking about having patience in times of suffering or strife. And I think that's pretty relevant these days, so I'll read through that here in a moment and we can then talk about it a little bit. So today's passage is James 5, 7 to 12. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. But above all, my brothers, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. And so, in this passage, James starts by asking that we remain patient until the Lord returns, in the same way that farmers wait for their harvest despite the rains. And he even says that we should establish our hearts since the coming of the Lord is at hand. So he's encouraging us to keep our eyes and keep our focus upon the Lord's return and let that motivate our actions and our choices. In this way, James is saying that thinking of Christ and his return should be the utmost importance to us, but especially in these times of despair or of suffering. And the analogy of a farmer is a really good one here because the farmer is focused on his fruit or the yield of his crops rather than worrying about the rains or the troubles that may come before him. And so keeping focus on that fruit, that godly fruit, is really what's important here. In verse 9, James then asks that we do not grumble against one another, and in doing so incur God's judgment. And the reason for that is that grumbling only serves to separate us more from God and from our fellow believers. So he's reminding us that God is at the door as a judge, and is hearing and is ever present. And James is saying really that God sees all that happens and he will not forget these things. So he won't forget the good that we do, but he also sees and remembers the injustices that happen in the world. And he goes on in verses 10 and 11 to remind us that the prophets have suffered and still remain faithful, still remain patient through all this. And really trusting and waiting on God in the here and now, despite what we may be dealing with, is not easy. Just look around the world today, right? There are so many challenges going on with the pandemic, with the economy, with personal health care and finances and social unrest and so on. And even some of us too may be mourning the loss of loved ones or acquaintances or friends, but also the loss of our plans or our hopes or dreams for the year 2020. And any of these plans going forward, that life may not look how we thought it might at this point, at this time, because things have changed so much over the past year. And all the suffering really is difficult, and it's not something that's easy just to hand over to the Lord immediately. But in all this, James is trying to remain encouraging for us, saying that we call those blessed that have remained steadfast. And again, he's reminding us of the saints, but also of Job. And Job's steadfastness, even in unimaginable suffering and loss, as we're told through the Old Testament. But through it all, Job was able to stay positive and faithful because he was firm in his faith, and he allowed God to comfort him as his own Redeemer. And James also then reminds us in this verse of the purposes of the Lord, and of how he's compassionate and merciful. And he means that God will not leave us to ourselves in these times, but we can count on him to remember us, so that with whatever we're dealing with, we can count on the fact that God has his purposes for us, and they come from his great compassion and mercy. So we don't have to dwell on these present circumstances, because our hope is not here. Our hope is in the Lord. And so the last portion, then, James says, finally, but above all, my brothers, do not swear, either by heaven or earth, or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes, and your no be no, so you may not fall under condemnation. And with this last part, he's really kind of saying that we must be true to our word, not overcommitting, not falsely promising things that we don't intend to do. Because before us, God has kept his commitments to us, and so we should do the same for him and for others as well as ourselves. We must be keeping ourselves honest and upright and truthful, so that others will believe our yeses and our nos during this time. And we can avoid this further separation from God by not being in the truth. And as a way to really kind of tie that back to the beginning with suffering, as we keep our commitments to others, it should help us to remember God's commitment to us and his commitment to take care of us, even during these times of suffering. So thanks so much for listening. I hope this has been great for you guys today, and God bless.